I'm counting on you, Michael. Counting on you. Don't screw it up. uh, all right. Well, it looks like everybody's got their ice cream. I think we can start. Is there any complaints on the comments? Like the stream is up, running. All Michael Bunting. Yeah. Does anybody know how to turn the lights off in the back? I'm sure the switch is somewhere. Maybe these. Here's some switches. Is that better? All right. All right. So I'm sure, as all of you know, I've been working on kind of revamping our JavaScript pipeline over the past few months. I'm sure you saw pieces of it, or I've even worked with Webpack. And the main goal of this presentation is just to kind of show you how it changes JavaScript. Even though it's JavaScript, you can kind of write it in a whole different way now, much more object-oriented, much more separation of concerns, linting, testing, all that sort of stuff. After the presentation, if you're interested in the Webstront store repo, or project, I should say, in the documentation repo, there's a javascript.markdown file, and that will kind of give you more detail. Like, it's way more detail than the presentation goes into, and we can adapt it and change it over time as we update stuff. So the broad topics are basically the new features of JavaScript that we can now use, linting, and testing of JavaScript. I'm sure some of our C# developers and stuff probably work with linting is also sometimes called static analysis. So I think we use that through StonarCube right now for some of our other projects. So it's kind of along those lines, if you're familiar with that. I guess what enables most of this is Webpack, but it's also Babel and polyfills are under the hood what Webpack is running to give us these features. It gives you some headaches in your locals, but it really probably is one of the best ways to set up a JavaScript environment in this day and age. It really has taken a lead over other alternatives and is pretty well supported at this point. Okay, so here's a incomplete list, but just kind of some of the stuff that we can use right now, like I'm using it currently in code that's in production. You can use promises, modules, classes, everything else that's listed there. We also have a lot of DOM stuff. We also have a new setup for polyfills, so if there's something that isn't there, it should be pretty easy to polyfill. That'll be covered a little bit in this presentation, and also it's covered in more detail in the Markdown file. In practice, what does this all mean for our development? Basically, a lot less boilerplate. I'm not sure if when you worked in JavaScript in the past, a lot of people, you had to use strict. You would wrap your code in a immediately invoked function expression. There was all sorts of weird little boilerplate if you wanted to use a module system. All of that is pretty much gone now. Also, in addition, with modules, we can rely on globals a lot less. You'll still use some stuff. I mean, technically fetch and some of the DOM stuff is technically a global, but for most of our application state, we'll all be able to be contained within its corresponding module. So that will help separate concerns and make our code easier to test and just easier to reason about when you're going forward and changing features in the future. JS modules, it's kind of a confusing landscape. It's starting to shake out now, finally, in 2018, but I'm sure you've seen all those different module types. Going forward, we're going to use the ES format, which is just the import and export. There's good documentation in the JavaScript file, and also just Mozilla documents have a lot of information on that if you're interested. That's the official ECMAScript or JavaScript standard, so I figured that makes the most sense to go forward with that. Webpack will, something behind me is beeping. But anyway, Webpack will let us consume other module formats using the ES import syntax. So even if the module is written in Require or Common or UMD or whatever, we can still include it with an import, and Webpack will just kind of work out the differences and bring it in. Yarn is also another key tool in the setup. It is basically a drop-in replacement for NPM. It's very similar, but is slightly faster, a little more reliable, and just comes with some stuff. NPM is largely backported a lot of what Yarn added, so they're more similar now than when I had started this project, but it's a pretty solid package manager and relies under the hood on the NPM registry. So you have a ton of modules to work with, and a lot of them are pretty good. You got to do your research. There's almost too many modules, like it's almost too many to deal with sometimes, but you can usually find a good module to accomplish a lot of what you're trying to get done. Another thing is with Yarn and Webpack and modules and everything, most of our dependencies should be able to be added to our package.json through the yarn add command and then imported wherever you're using them currently. You shouldn't have to copy and paste files in. Even if you need to make a modification, in most cases you can patch the underlying method. I can go, that's probably a little more advanced than this talk, but you can go in and just modify the methods that you need to and adjust the functionality without having to just copy the whole thing in. The disadvantages of copying a file in is then you're then stuck with that version, and it becomes harder and harder to update the longer you go because you just get more and more off track from the master branch. And as you know, it creates an SVN style thing where if you do want to upgrade the underlying plugin, you have to just do like an old style merge, like just using your merge tool, and it can be kind of a headache. So that kind of covers Yarn. These new features, I mean, they'll let us keep our codes much more organized. It'll be easier to cut down our file size quite dramatically. I mean, before the files grew large, but that wasn't really the developer's fault. It was just because, you know, heaven help you figure out how to add another JS file and get it into our old Cold Fusion setup. Like, it was just, if you need to add functionality, you have a ticket, you just add it to script.js or whatever, and it was in there. These new tools should make it much easier to create a new module or an independent output file if that is the right case for your project. Classes also, I think, are a great way to structure functionality. They give you a very expressive way to represent your business logic and make it easier. So I'll be going into that a little bit more. And also with the new DOM API, we can pretty much dump jQuery on our front end. If you're more familiar with it for a back-end project, that's fine, because we don't have a lot of uncached users. Like a backend, like somebody in new web admin is going to have that version of jQuery cached, and it's not really going to be a big hit. But for the front end, we have millions of users coming from Google that generally don't have that stuff cached, and we're paying for them, so we want to give them a quick page load so we can just rely on the native DOM. With polyfills, it's much easier to work with the native DOM. You get before, after, kind of all the common sense stuff. It's not like before where it was really a nightmare to work with. And we can also, when you start using modules, it makes it much easier to break up your functionality, so we can ship each page type its own small, compact JavaScript file. Right now we're shipping well over probably like 120 kilobytes of JavaScript to every single page, and some pages like category or home really don't use much of that functionality. So it'll make it much easier to kind of customize our JavaScript bundles for a given page type. Organization, so this is kind of following the standards that I think Justin and Tom, and just working over the past month or two to port some stuff over, I've come up with. You would have a distinct index.js for each page type, and that would kind of take care of all your initialization, importing the modules for that page type. For example, I have in JS product page index, that's kind of the, I guess you could call it the entry point, where all JavaScript is imported, any objects need instantiated, or whatever stuff you need to do right when the page loads, and then you can kind of hand off responsibility to the underlying modules. All modules that any custom module that you write that pertains to, say, in this case, the product page, should live inside that product-page folder alongside the index, or even in subfolders if a certain feature starts to outgrow the root folder of product page. If a module ends up being shared across pages, so like I'm starting to rewrite the autocomplete to get rid of jQuery and the old, I think it's like Bootstrap 2 code, you can put that up in a common folder, and that just signifies that it's shared across many different page types and isn't just specific to the product page or home page. So here's a quick look. I mean, it's very stripped down, but this is essentially what the new structure will look like for an entry point for a page. Basically, you import all your stuff. You have a main function that is your key kind of initializer that, like, you know, does whatever DOM stuff you need to do right at load, or just kind of one-off stuff that doesn't fit well into a class. And then the load polyfills before, what that does, we'll get into detail in the next couple slides, but essentially that makes sure that the browser's polyfilled and ready to go so that all these new features that you're using are available in the browser. So load polyfills before, as I said, you just pass your main initializer function, and then what it does is it, under the hood, uses dynamic imports. So for, say, 80% of our users have pretty modern browsers, they won't get the polyfill bundle. They'll just get our, you know, our lean application bundle. And then if they do need a polyfill for some sort of feature, they'll get shipped that, and then it will execute your main function after the browser's polyfilled and ready to go. This cuts down on, so you shouldn't have to do a lot of, with polyfills, you shouldn't have to write kind of hacky code. You should be able to use kind of whatever the most modern way to do it is, and then polyfill that functionality. There are a couple edge cases like iterators, like for-in and stuff like that, just can't be reliably polyfilled, but I would say 95% of new JavaScript and DOM features can be pretty solidly polyfilled. I might get into detail in here if not, but I can show you how to add polyfills. If there's a feature that you want to use, we can likely add it to the polyfill file and get that working for you so you can use that new functionality. So here are a couple patterns that we can try and use with this new tooling. It should help us clean up our code going forward. Decomposition, it's one of my favorite ways to program, or not ways to program, but just kind of a pattern or tool that you can use to help keep your code clear, because as stuff grows, it's nice to go back and decompose it a little bit and break it down so that you can understand it in the smaller pieces. I mean, basically, you just break it down into as concise of a class or method as you can. The longer a method gets, the harder it is to understand at a glance what that method's actually responsible for and what it does. If a class, I mean, there are some exceptions, but generally speaking, if it starts to grow more than a couple hundred lines, you should probably think about breaking it down into subclasses underneath it. Not necessarily a subclass, but import other classes that handle that responsibility. And just another tip, with variable names, I mean, since everything's being transpiled, I see in a lot of places we give like stuff like a 1 or 2 letter variable name, and then we have a comment kind of describing what it is. Just don't be afraid to give it a nice descriptive variable name. That's, you know, a long variable name is nicer, because then throughout all your code, you're seeing what that variable name is instead of having to go back and refer to the comment to figure out what it is. So breaking down classes, when I first started moving over the gallery, which on WebStront is like the main thing with the thumbnails and the image zooming and all that stuff, the class was roughly about 600-ish lines. I shipped that just because I wanted to get it out, and it worked well enough. But when I went back to make adjustments or fix bugs, I found it was still a little bit confusing. So I ended up breaking it down. So you have the gallery class, and then it imports 4, and actually now 5. Michael is working on a mobile gallery. But it's, what that does is if I need to fix something specific to the thumbnail, there's a pretty good chance that the functionality is going to be in that thumbnail file. And likewise, if Michael's mobile gallery needs something tweaked or something, it's a pretty good chance that the bug is going to be, or the feature that can be added in his mobile gallery. It just makes for a nice clean separation of your concerns and makes it easier to reason about what's going on in that class. So best practices, you don't always have to follow these 100%. No rule is absolute, but these are probably generally good things. Is if you're importing a class, it shouldn't be, the imported class shouldn't know about its parent, essentially. Like, it should be abstracted away from its parent. How you get around, so some, like in my case, obviously when you click a thumbnail, something needs to happen to the main image in the gallery. There's a thing called custom events now. So from the thumbnail, you can send a custom event, say render zoom image, render no zoom image, or play video, or whatever the event may be, along with a little bit of information. And then the gallery can then capture that event and then relay it into the appropriate class, whether it be zoom image, no zoom image, or play video, what have you. Let's see. encapsulates your functionality and makes it for pretty easy to work with. Another technique this has actually been in JavaScript, but we don't use it too much. Choose getters. As you can see, hello? Oh, is it back now? Okay, I think we have audio again. I have no clue what that was. I've never really used OBS before today much. I mean, I've experimented with it a little bit this week, but no clue what happened there. And then you can just hit play, and it will jump back in. Okay, so yeah, picking up where we left off, that's kind of how to use getters or in some cases setters to break down your logic and just make stuff a little easier to understand. I think it covers a little bit before, but if you are working on something on the front end and you're trying to redo it without jQuery, here's a kind of incomplete list of all the stuff that's available with the native DOM now. It's pretty much one for one. Almost anything you can do in jQuery, you can do in the DOM now, and it's pretty straightforward. Probably not quite as clean as jQuery, but a lot more acceptable and will save us a lot of, really reduce the package size that we have to ship out to people. So I guess having said all this, even though it's JavaScript, I'm sure to some of you that doesn't look at all like JavaScript. I mean, this is kind of packing a lot of new stuff, whether it's classes, decorators, all sorts of stuff. Hopefully the next section, the next couple slides can kind of help show you where to go if you're interested in learning more. Also, we got plenty of good resources on our team. I mean, I know Michael Bunting's dove into a lot. Lucas, a couple other guys on the team are pretty up to date on new JavaScript stuff, so you can also ask around the team and somebody will be able to help you out. So here's a couple simple resources. It's not maybe the greatest examples, but you can look in JS product page if you want to kind of see how it relates to WebStron Store. If you're looking for jQuery alternatives specifically, plainjs.com is a good resource. And then also just Mozilla's MDN docs are really good. They're the official source of Microsoft Chrome and Apple all reference them now. Like that's their official documentation for the web APIs. So it's a really good source for everything. And last but not least, one of probably the best ways to learn new features is linting. Like I said, sometimes called static analysis. This is how I learned a fair amount of the new features in ESS or in ECMAScript in the new JavaScript. I'll give you a couple examples of kind of how it can teach you. It can also prevent bad practices, can also outright prevent errors in your code. And it does a couple other things too. It helps keep it consistent across the team. So nobody, putting leading commas, trailing commas, whatever. It should keep all that kind of stuff consistent. No more arguing about simple stuff, whether it be commas or spaces. It just kind of makes all those decisions for you. It leaves you just to get down to the problem and not have to worry about style concerns or whether you're making an accidental mistake or anything like that. Yeah, I mean, that's basically the main principles behind linting. I'll give you a couple examples of how it works in practice. So also, I want to say it's not going to make you a JavaScript god, but it's probably one of the best tools around to help you. That's a secret slide, Michael. It's probably one of the best tools around to help you learn the language. So here's an example of object property shorthand that I didn't even know this existed, and this is also using ESLint and their built-in plugin for VS Code. But I mean, it just simply highlights it. You can hover over it, and it will tell you what's wrong. And if you don't know, you can go Google, JavaScript property shorthand and look it up to see what the proper way is. But basically, in this example, if I'm taking a variable and I'm putting it into a JavaScript object, and I want the key name to be the same as the variable name, I can just do plugins and then it underneath the hood will expand that variable, making the variable name the key and the variable's value, the actual value in the JSON or the JavaScript object. It also helps just prevent unnecessary code. As you can see here, like that's a useless string. It's not really doing anything. A useless wrapper function that's not really needed now that we're using modules. If you create a variable but you never actually reference it, it will tell you about that. It just helps prevent a lot of dead code that isn't actually doing anything. Sometimes you put code in and then move on and then forget about it, and here that variable is never even referenced anywhere. So it will alert you to that and let you know right away. Currently, we're linting page and passing linting in product page, test, polyfills, and categories. If you have a special case or something, I mean, obviously there's always special cases where maybe the linting rule doesn't agree, but it's the only right way to do it, or the linting, you have to jump through hoops to get it to pass through the linter. It's only static analysis. It can only do so much. So you can put little inline comments, which basically say ESLint, disable this rule or adjust the rule to make it fit your scenario. Oftentimes you don't have to do that. You can ask somebody and they might be able to help you refactor the code to get it to pass, but there are certain scenarios where you just need to disable the rule, and there's all kinds of customality. You can just disable it for that line even. ESLint's pretty customizable. Yes. Okay, that should, we're going to be, oh, that's fine. I mean, I'll just talk a little louder. I don't think that, yeah. Oh, yeah, that's no problem at all. Oh, that's fine, yep. All right, so we're inheriting our ESLint rule set from Airbnb. It's just kind of a good starting point. So we shouldn't have to. It's a really solid rule set. Tom and Justin both looked it over and approved of it too. So we shouldn't have to make too many customizations. All the stock rules should be pretty much set for us. If you're using VS Code, I would definitely put the ESLint plugin in that gives you those nice little underlines right as you're coding. You can customize it to on save or even right as you're typing the code. I like it as I'm typing because it just kind of right away prevents me from making errors. If you're not using VS Code, I would highly recommend it, especially for JavaScript-based projects. It's top-notch. It's definitely the best JavaScript editor out there. I can say that pretty comfortably. Other projects, Cold Fusion and stuff, there might be other editors that are better, but if you work a lot in JavaScript, I would definitely give VS Code a solid look. To run the full lint from the command line, you just go to the lib directory, run yarn lint, and that will just print out all your errors on the screen, telling you what file, what line number, and what the linting error is. That's a nice way of kind of just checking everything, not just the current file that you're in. Linting will prevent bugs. So in certain cases, it can help prevent bugs that you might not otherwise notice. It'll put a squiggly red line and tell you what's going on and how to fix it sometimes. This is internal right now, but going forward, on pull requests to dev, JavaScript will be linted just to keep everything consistent before it gets pulled in. I've experimented with it, but I haven't actually added it to the TFS repo yet. But it does work, and I think it seems like a good solution. We have a Git pre-commit hook, so if you want, it will lint everything before you commit in your local. That way, so you don't commit bad code locally, push it up, and then only to find out it's bad in the pull request. Also, yes. Oh, you're good. Oh yeah. So Lucas asked, how strict is the linting going to be in the dev pull request? And the answer to that is it's going to be the same exact lint you run in your local. So when you run yarn lint in your local, that's the exact same command against the same set of rules that's going to be run in the dev pull request. It'll be, I think the best structure is probably to put it as one of the first steps. So you don't have to wait for all the Cold Fusion to compile and everything else to compile. You know, you don't want to compile all your JavaScript in Cold Fusion only to find out. It'll probably be one of the first. So it should fail fast, but it should also, you can just run yarn lint before you make your pull request locally. But that's the idea. Let's see. So that kind of covers linting. We can go over it more later. Our next topic is testing, which I'm sure if you've worked in C# or Ruby or even Python, those languages are all pretty heavy on testing. But JavaScript historically not so much, but it's really gotten much easier and a lot nicer in the past couple of years to test in JavaScript. So the main command is just yarn test from the lib directory, and that will run our full test suite. By default, it just runs unit tests. There's a thing called end-to-end tests, but they're a little too slow to run by default, so you have to do a I can show you later how to run them specifically. But a test in this case is anything that resides in the JS/test directory, and the file name ends in .test.js. Running yarn test will also by default give you your coverage results. I think I have a screenshot of kind of what the output looks like. So there's sort of this is maybe a couple weeks old, but a snapshot of all the unit tests that I've been writing as I've been reworking some functionality on our product pages. It's really pretty nice, pretty fast too. I mean, this is 76 unit tests in about 2.5 seconds. It gives you a nice breakdown by statements, branch, functions, lines, and then also gives you uncovered lines. So red is a completely uncovered line. Yellow is a branch statement where only one of the branches is taken, but the other one was never actually executed during that particular test run. Under the hood, we're using Jest, which is it's made by Facebook, but it's got pretty solid community support. It's not just ran by them. There's a lot of varied contributors. If you use React, it really integrates with that nicely, but it's also awesome for just regular vanilla JavaScript projects. It gives you the ability to run the full test suite. You can also just run one single test or even just a test suite, so all tests that pertain to a specific model or something. You get a nice mock DOM with JS DOM is integrated really nice. So obviously with JavaScript, a lot of stuff you're testing is going to rely on DOM interaction. So JS DOM really gives you like a full mock browser, but it's really fast inside of your test to work with. It also has nice options. So like in my commit hook, it'll run all the tests, but only tests that were altered by that particular commit. So it has a separate command, but I can help set people up with that if they would like in the future. But it's pretty nice. So when you're so every time you commit, it runs your test and it adds maybe 2 seconds to your commit, but then you know whether you broke your test before you even committed into Git. It also allows you to define your test names as strings, which allows for nice clear descriptions of what you're testing. That was a good find by Michael Bunting. But it just really allows for clear descriptions, and it also allows for nice asynchronous code. So in the past, asynchronous code was really hard to test because the test would complete before the result returned. Basically, you just return a promise, and then the test will wait for that promise to fulfill. But, yeah, okay. As I was saying, it allows for just nice testing with asynchronous code, which can be difficult to test. And it also has great tools for stubbing and mocking. So if you have a complex library that you're relying on, it likely already has a module out there on GitHub or something that stubs it or mocks it out for you. Because a lot of times you don't want to import that full module because something in it might break, but then that's not really, you want to try and isolate your test to the current module you're working on. So stubbing and mocking, it's a whole other topic, probably outside the scope of this presentation, but it's in jest and it works really nicely. And last but not least, it also gives you end-to-end testing. So you can actually, using Chrome driver, tell it to load a page, tell it to click a certain DOM element, and then say, I expect the visibility of this to be hidden or whatever. I mean, you can really get limitless, and it will actually test it against, your full local environment. They're kind of slow, so you don't want to write a lot of them, and you're also not going to want to do them on every commit. But if you have a complex use case that you're worried about breaking, that can't be reliably unit tested, and you want to test like the full stack, it does provide that functionality and works pretty well. So I guess why test? If you're not familiar with it, it can seem like a lot of extra code you're writing or just kind of a pain in the ass to write extra code that doesn't actually get shipped to the end user. Really, it helps prevent regressions, which is really nice. So if you get a bug, you write a test that captures the state of that bug. And if you're lucky, the next time the bug happens again, your test will also break. So it won't happen again. It will be caught by the test before it ever becomes a bug again. It also gives you a better understanding of your code. I've found that I end up writing a lot more concise and understandable code because when you go to test it, if it's hard to understand, you're going to know, because it is just really hard to test code that is complex and just hard to figure out. It'll help you break your code down into easier to understand bits and pieces. And also, well-named tests will kind of double as documentation. So I think the next slide will give a brief example of that. What's that? Oh yeah. It can stand in as the documentation. Oh, that's true. That's what I found out rewriting a lot of this is like I'm trying to get the spec for something and it's like go to prod and just click around and see how it functions, and that's your spec. Like that's not bad, but it would be nice to have test suite set. Yeah. So I think if we write tests, it would really help if we have to do rewrites or change functionality in the future to kind of, one, have it test the actual functionality, but as you can see, it can get pretty descriptive with the describe statements, and how that breaks down to when you run it in the console is something like that. So super zoom, when click should close, etc. It really is nice and readable. Question from Michael. Yeah, so okay, so for those of you listening online, Michael just elaborated that essentially your test name should read like a clear English description of the underlying functionality, to sum up what Michael just said. And that's all I have today. Does anybody have any questions? We covered a lot of stuff, but if you have any questions, Dean?
So this is a policy going forward. We're going to filter things through this and make sure all the code is clean?
Yeah, it's going to be I guess a TFS, what is it, a build step? Yeah, like a build step. Yeah, I guess is what it would be called. And this is only, like, I'm only turning this on a Webstron. At other projects, kind of, it's up to them to decide what they do. But, I mean, I think it's a good model. It keeps code consistent across everybody. And since you're using an already inherited rule set, there saves a lot of time arguing about what the rule set should be. You just pick a decent one and work forward with that.
Just to clarify, the linting is only for the front end JavaScript. What are you doing with the back end JavaScript, new web ads and stuff?
Okay, so I just got a question. Does the linting only apply to the front end? And right now that is correct. All of this actually only applies to the front end. If anybody, basically, I think the front end and the back end are so different that they should have their own Webpack setups. They're essentially separate projects. They don't seem to share a lot of stuff between them. I don't know if anybody else agrees or disagrees. When I set this up, I just wanted to focus on the front end just because that was already a large enough scope. If anybody wants to collaborate with me, I would be more than glad to help them move this over to new web admin or set up a second Webpack instance to compile that stuff, or if they should be the same. I don't really know. We'd have to sit down and talk about that with people who write. I truthfully don't write anything ever for new web admin, so I'm not a great source to do that. I know about Webpack and all that stuff, but know almost zero about NWA. Yes, questions from Gene. So the details for the syntax, like, you mean just kind of the explanation and like the. So if you want to, Michael, do you want to open up Chrome and go to Airbnb? So that's kind of the. No, just go to the Airbnb. I think it's already in my thing. If you type, yeah, right there. So that's kind of the nice part about relying on it. Yeah, that one there, Airbnb/JavaScript. Yep, I'll take you right to the markdown. So this is the rule set that we're inheriting from, and that's kind of the nice part about inheriting it is it gives you a full table of contents, and as Michael will kind of take you here and show you, it gives you nice details and examples, and then also sometimes we'll explain the reasoning behind it, like why they're doing a rule a certain way, and give you, bad and good examples. It's been a pretty good resource for me as I've been updating my JavaScript over the past couple months. I mean, I really like the details in it. Okay, so good question. So Gene just asked, how is linting going to work with our old legacy JavaScript? And it's not. There's an ESLint ignore, and all the old stuff is ignored. Any new file you create or any file that is existingly linted will still be linted, but all the legacy and other stuff is in the ignore file right now. If you created a new file recently and it isn't lintable and you want to go back and clean it up and take it out of the ignore, that would be great. But if not, that's all kind of grandfathered in. If it's in the ignore list, I would hope we don't add to the ignore list. But if it's in the ignore list, it kind of gets a free pass, and you can write whatever you want in there as long as it doesn't break prod. I'll see a question from Lucas. So Lucas just asked about a standard for documentation. No, I don't. I like JSDoc. I've experimented with a little bit, but haven't worked with it. If we want to sit down and talk about that someday, I would love to kind of add that, some sort of documentation. Right now, I think it'd be nice to write tests and kind of document it there. Would be a really good start. And then once we get some tests filled out, maybe we could focus more on documentation. Because, I mean, we're a pretty big team, but I think in a lot of cases, we don't need like A+ documentation right now because we're not a publicly reliable, there's not thousands of strangers or people using our library that are going to. We can rocket chat or just walk up to the person's desk who wrote it. I mean, I think it would be nice to have great documentation eventually, but for the time being, I would focus more on unit testing and just getting more consistent code. Any more questions? Yes.
So for you said that there should be index pages for the different page types, like product, category. Does that apply to one-off pages as well? So if I write JavaScript for, like I'm working on the
I think so. So Michael just asked, does a index and a whole new page type count for one-off pages? And I would say generally yes, because if you don't create a new folder and a new index file for that page, you're going to have to lump it in with some other code. Then you're going to be lumping specialty code in and shipping it to everybody for a one-off page. So I would think, what were you working on? So his example was the gift guide. I would think in that example that'd be fine to make a gift-guide folder, like a gift guide folder in the JS and then an index and set up your functionality and make a new file and Webpack that gets shipped out from that. I mean, that can depend, I guess. Like if it's a kind of derivative on a product page, you might be able to get away with just using the product pages index. But if it's truly a custom page that doesn't share much functionality with the rest of the site, it makes perfect sense, I think, to give it its own index file. Any other questions? If there's any questions online, Michael, chat? Nice. That is the stream was crappy and they just closed it. All right. Well, I mean, if nobody has any more questions, that should wrap it up. And you can grab more ice cream if you like. Otherwise, I think I'm going to kind of message the building and let them know. And we have 2 more tubs of that ice cream, so we got plenty of ice cream to go around. When I told them it was developer-sized portions, they're like, "Wow, we don't have 10-gallon jugs." All right, Michael, you can stop the stream now if you want. You can put it. It's in downloads, I think. Yes.
If you want a whole new build step for the listening to fail, because I thought right now you're just including it as a normal.
Yeah, I would. I think I would add a separate build step. That was so it's completely isolated because it doesn't actually. Basically, there would be a lint and a test step eventually once I integrate testing. But
like, subscribe.
Oh, by the way, like and subscribe for more great content. Smash that like button.
It's a really good
I set up that one.
It's a great way to end the stream.